Here are 3 scrapped killers for Dead by Daylight that you never knew about. In this video, we're going to be exploring 3 killers that nearly came to the game. Some are concepts that the devs have directly spoken about and given reasons as to why they never came to be, while another is much more mysterious. Before we start the video, my name's Lydia and I make Dead by Daylight videos like these as often as I can. I also stream Dead by Daylight and occasionally other horror games over on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/EarthToLydia. Come by a stream sometime, we'd love to have you. Now let's get into the video. First up, we have the Teacher. The Teacher is an unofficial killer that was hinted at right before the first DLC for Dead by Daylight ever dropped. Back in the days when it was much easier to access the game files, players found a couple of new images which hinted at this upcoming character. Based on the border shapes of the images that were found, we can deduce that these files would have been related to a killer's power, a survivor perk, and a new item. In the files, we saw Detention, which was under the killer's power. The image showed a modified classroom ruler with a built-in blade, which we can assume would be the killer's weapon. Another image showed a survivor item called the Trapple, which had an apple filled with razor blades. And finally, we had a new survivor perk called Underperform, with a survivor wearing a dunce cap. The fact that 2 of these image files were associated with survivors does hint that this would have been an idea for a survivor as well as a killer concept, but there's just something about the killer that got everyone interested. Aside from these images, we've never heard or seen anything further about the Teacher, and it has actually been theorized that these game files were deliberately put in the game by the devs to throw players off before they could officially reveal what the chapter would actually be. However, these images are still in the game files even to this day, and at some point I would love to have Behavior revisit them as it's such an interesting concept, and I'd love to know what they'd have done with it. Also, playing as the Teacher on Midwich would take that map to a whole new level. Next up, we have a killer called the Smasher. In a past dev stream, Behavior revealed that in early development, the team were actually working on a killer that would be able to break any staging element on the map. This implies that loops could be completely destroyed, walls, if not entire buildings. Ultimately, this was scrapped because they didn't know how they'd be able to balance a killer like that, which I think is a fair comment to make. The idea that there was potentially going to be a killer who could completely flatten maps and make escaping them impossible is kind of terrifying. I don't even know how you'd go about balancing that unless you made the wind-up time on that ability super slow, but even then the timing feels like a really difficult thing to get right and could easily make this the strongest or weakest character in the game. Since then, we've had the addition of breakable walls to the game, which allows any killer to break down specific walls to make loops weaker for survivors. So, in a way, part of the Smasher still lives on, just in a different form. And our final killer that was toyed with early on in the development cycle was a flying killer. What we know from some dev interviews and live streams is that this killer would have been able to fly directly into the air, towering over most maps for an aerial view. The dev said that this idea was scrapped as once again it would have been too overpowered. Just imagine a killer who can easily track down any survivor on the map by being able to spot them with hardly any line of sight breaks. Pair that with some of the perks that we have today, especially perks that expose survivors, and you've got an absolute menace on your hands. It is worth noting that there's another side of the coin to this. The idea for this killer was toyed with before the game had any indoor maps. Had this killer actually made it, then they could actually be critically underpowered on indoor maps like Leary's if the ability to fly was the main or only part of their kit. These days, we have Vecna, who can use a fly spell to propel himself slightly into the air, but his flying mechanic mostly pushes him forward rather than up. This is probably the closest that we'll get to the original flying killer concept, and to be honest, I think that's for the best. So what do you think about the killers that I mentioned in this video? I personally would love to see the Teacher make a comeback in some form, but it seems unlikely at this point. If you like this one, then check out another recent video where I talked about licensed killers that I would love to see in the game. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you consider leaving a like or subscribing to catch more videos as I upload them. I'm planning on doing a follow-up where I go over some things for survivors that never made it into the game. Let me know your thoughts about that down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.